Welcome, my people. As you all know, I always bring you the latest update on this Laju TV show. Today, we are here again to discuss what we've witnessed concerning the ongoing protests sweeping across our nation. This event has gripped the attention of everyone, both locally and internationally, as they reveal the deep-rooted issues plaguing our country. The spontaneous reason behind the protest lies in the struggle of everyday Nigerians who are taking to the street to express their frustration and depression. These are not just isolated incidents, but a collective outcry for a populist push to the brink by an economic crisis that has deepened over time. Largely attributed to bad government, the country is facing soaring unemployment rate, inflation, and a lack of basic amenities, which have all contributed to the unrest. Citizens are hungry, both literally and metaphorically, for change and accountability for their leaders. Initially, this protest began peacefully as citizens gathered to voice their demands for better living conditions and more responsible leadership. However, what started as a peaceful demonstration quickly escalated into violence. Reports indicate that the situation took a drastic turn when the police officers intervened with excessive force, allegedly using tear gas and other means to disperse the crowd. This heavy-handed approach only served to inflame the anger of the protesters who felt right to peaceful assembly and assessed their grievance was being trampled upon. As tension rose, the protest spread across various regions of the country, each experiencing its own level of unrest and violence. In some areas, what was meant to be a demonstration of unity and demand for change devolved into chaos. Protesters fueled by anger and desperation clashed with law enforcement, leading to tragic outcomes. It has been reported that about 9 protesters have lost their lives, and this confrontation is somber reminder of the high stakes involved. The aftermath of this protest has been severe, with several properties looted and offices burned in some state. The destruction has not only caused significant material loss but has also further strained the relationship between the government and its citizens. If you are following us or watching this from any part of the world, we urge you to like, comment and share this video to spread awareness of the situation. Don't forget to click on the notification icon to stay updated with our next video. Let's take a short break and I'll be right back with more insight and analysis. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to LAJUPOG TV show.
The whole of crime scene
is happening in the street again.
The center of political news, celebrity gossip, religious gossip, and happiness in the society.
Join us, the voice of Africa.
In an effort to demonstrate their disagreement and discomfort with the current state of affairs, Nigerian youth took to the street yesterday in protest. The catalyst for their action was a deep-seated frustration with ongoing issues such as bad governance, economic hardship, and political jingoism. These young protesters, representing a significant portion of the country's population, sought to express their dissatisfaction and demand accountability for those in power. However, the situation quickly deteriorated. The presence and actions of the police force, who resorted to using tear gas to disperse the crowd, only served to intensify the protesters' anger. This excessive use of force was perceived as an infringement on their right to assemble, further inflaming an already volatile situation. The protesters felt that instead of being heard, they were being attacked. Many protesters reported feeling as though they were being targeted for simply exercising their economic democratic right to protest. They claimed that the authorities seemed intent on suppressing their voices and that the aggressive tactics used by the force were meant to intimidate and silence them. Protesters were chased away from designated protest location, adding to the chaos and confusion. This forced displacement heightened their sense of vulnerability and distrust towards the authorities. As tension escalated, the frustration of the protesters was palpable. Many were heard shouting insults at the government, venting their anger at what they perceive as years of neglect and corruption. The streets echoed with chants of outrage, with some lamenting that they found themselves in a country where the leadership seemed indifferent to their suffering. This raw expression of emotion was not only a critique of current governance, but also an explosive outburst from a population that felt abandoned and betrayed. Adding fuel to the fire were the comments from certain politicians who publicly dismissed the protesters as fools. Such unsympathetic and inhuman remarks exacerbated the situation, highlighting a disconnect between the government and the citizen. For many, these comments were not just insulting, they were a clear indication that the voices and concern of the average Nigerian were being trivialized by those in position of power. Faced with this blatant disregard for their plight, the protesters decided they had nothing left to lose. They could no longer remain passive in the face of economic challenges and political negligence. In several states, this determination to be heard manifested in heightened tension and violence. What began as a demonstration turned into battles with some protesters feeling they had no choice but to fight back. Some instances, the protests were infuriated by hoodlums who seized the opportunity to engage in criminal activities, further complicating the situation. This individual, acting independently of the core groups of protesters, broke into properties and vandalized infrastructure such as climbing and attempting to destroy traffic lights. This action were not representative of the protest core intent, underscored the chaos and desperation of the moment. The tumult witnessed in this protest underscores the depth of anger and frustration felt by many Nigerians. The youth in particular are demanding that their voices be heard and their grievances be addressed. The protests are a rebellion against a system that many believe has failed them, a desperate call for justice and reform. As this event unfolds, it remains to be seen how the government will respond to the demands and anger of the citizen. The people are no longer willing to accept empty promises and rhetoric. They want real change and they are prepared to fight for it. Let's watch this video to get more insight into the occurrence.
Thousands, mostly young people, poured onto the streets across Nigeria protesting against the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. Roads were blocked in parts of the country by either placard-carrying protesters or armed security forces deployed overnight after days of mobilization for protests against the government of Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu. While some groups also staged demonstrations in support of Mr. Tinubu, while rights groups and activists had raised concerns about a possible clampdown on the protests. Many businesses across the country were also shut on Thursday amid fears the protest could be a replay of the deadly 2020 demonstrations against police brutality in the West African nation, or a wave of violence similar to last month's protests in Kenya, where a tax hike led to chaos in the capital, Nairobi. Protesters chanted songs as they listed their demands, including the reinstatement of gas and electricity subsidies, whose removal as part of the government's audacious reforms to grow the economy has had a knock-on effect on the price of just about everything else.
No person is talking about their right to protest, but the court order have said that they should protest inside the stadium.
Hey, where are we? Are we not at the National Stadium? We are at the National Stadium. We are in the National Stadium.
Okay, but now, talking about...
And do you know that I've actually not seen the order? I've not seen the order. All I have seen are news reports.
We are protesting peacefully. Look at them throwing tear gas at us. We did not do anything. We did not cause any harm. Police are throwing tear gas at us. We are hungry. Tinubu, please come and address us.
Well, in Kaduna, protesters have looted and set parts of the Clear office on fire. Samuel Arwan, the overseeing Commissioner of Internal Security and Home Affairs, along with heads of other security agencies, visited the office to assess the situation. Meanwhile, the state police spokesperson reported that security operatives arrested protesters found with incriminating items such as jackknives, live ammunition, and police camouflage uniform. According to Mansur Hassan, the false PRO, the police gathered intelligence that the peaceful protest was hijacked by members of the proscribed Islamic movement of Nigeria and other hoodlums.
Hey, but why are we seeing their prescription in your phone?
It's automatically in my phone from TikTok.
Don't worry.
Yes, from TikTok. It's automatically
Investigation
It's secret, sir. Secret, sir.
No problem. Don't worry. Everybody knows that these people are violent. I have said this. I have said this several times. Without number. Don't worry. We just nobody stopping from this. Nobody stop. Why are you? Why look like someone that will want things? Sit down. I'm well educated, sir. I'm well educated.
Well, Arise correspondent in Kaduna State, Nisi Gabriel, joins me now for the very latest. Nisi, good to have you join me tonight on Arise News Hour. What updates can you give us? Earlier in the day, as you dipped into other shows, the impression was there was not going to be protests in Kaduna State, or in best case scenario, it was going to be peaceful. But things turned south.
Yes, that's right. Earlier, the impression we got was that Kaduna was going to be peaceful. In fact, as a matter of fact, many of us thought that no group will hit the streets to protest. But surprisingly, this morning, much later in the day, we had a handful of protesters gathered at this very point. As a matter of fact, where I'm standing right now is where it all started earlier in the day. So a handful of protesters were gathered just right here beside me, peacefully protesting. They had their procession from this very point down to that very point. They did a U-turn coming back here to this popular roundabout called the NEPA roundabout, and they proceeded towards the government house. Well, it all started peacefully, but at some point, well, to our surprise, it just went south. It turned violent and chaotic. You could see billows of smoke all over the air, tires being burnt, government offices being looted. And at that point, the police had no option than to throw tear gas in a bid to disperse these protesters. Well, the very latest in Kaduna now is that there is no curfew in the state. Residents have been advised to remain calm and go about their business as usual. Ngozi.
Nisi, before I let you go, is there a sense that the point has been made by protesters? This was supposed to be a 10-day protest, but do you get a feel that the point has been made and so there's no need to go on with this protest? Is that what you're getting in Kaduna?
Well, if you ask me, as a matter of fact, I think the point has already been made. Either you hit the streets or you stay at home. The point has been made because not so many people could come out to open their business because of the fear of this protest. So as a matter of fact, activities to some extent were grounded because of the fear that this protest might be hijacked. So to a large extent, I think the protesters have been able to drive their points, and they're able to drive their grievances to the government. But the sad part of it, an unfortunate aspect of it, is that a peaceful protest, a protest that ought to be peaceful, turning violent, getting to the point where government properties are being looted, offices burnt, and offices destroyed, and some parts of the town destroyed. I think that's the sad part of this demonstration, and it's very bad and sad, I must say.
Yes, indeed. And we're hearing that IMN members, that's Islamic Movement of Nigeria, cashed in on the situation to cause mayhem. Any proof really that these are members of IMN or just people who, want to foment trouble?
I think both would be correct to say, Ngozi, because I was standing right in front of the government house when one of these persons, the video you just played, was apprehended by the security operatives, and his phone was taken away from him, and they went through his phone and they could see some incriminating substances or some evidence that associates him with this particularly proscribed group. And they took the phone and handed it over to the DSS for further investigation. So we are hoping that in the coming days, a discreet investigation will be carried out on this allegation, and as journalists will be on ground to follow through and to get more updates from the police.
Right, Nisi Gabriel, thank you very much for what you've been doing. You've been following this long before now. Well, I have with me in the studio Austin Aigbe. He is a member of the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. Thank you so much for joining us on Arise News Hour. Now, talking about democracy. With what has happened today, I mean, protests, dissent, are they're hallmarks of democracy, aren't they? Yeah. Day one of this protest, what's your assessment? Would you say this protests have made the point? Your assessment?
Well, I think like Nisi had just alluded, many people thought that it won't happen because of the investment of the Nigerian government to try to stop it. You recall that the Nigerian government had called traditional rulers and try to appeal. Even we saw videos of traditional institution on the street trying to say no to protest and all of that, like any kind of cause. But eventually, what happened for me, it's more like some kind of provocation. I say provocation because if you, at the early hours, I take Abuja as a case study. I'm sure you have seen videos from the Yayan Aziz where young people eventually had to undermine military blockade and all of that.
We've been following it.
Yes.
Been on it.
So what happened? There was some level of deprivation. So there were vehicular movement that was supposed to come into town. They were blocked off from Kugbo through the barracks, and eventually, by that blocking, they were allowing the folks to organize. So they began to gather, and people who probably would not want to protest started to engage. Before you know what was happening, there was a mass movement, and that mass movement undermined the military in uniform and of course with arms. And of course you saw eventually that, maybe I'm not too sure if you saw the video, when there was some form of live bullet to despite the folks, the protesters, one of the bullets went over to Kugbo Aziz in front of what they call Kugbo Palo, hit somebody, and literally, if it had hit him on the head, that folk would have died. So there was some level of provocation. But in all honesty, I think the reason for the protest today was actually meant. If it's message, I think the message, I don't want to use the word success, I think it's message delivery. The message has been delivered that Nigerians are truly weary about government policies and there's hunger in the land.
Now, after day one, what are your expectations? How should government be responding to this? Because some are saying this might just be a missed opportunity by the president to take advantage of this first day and the things that have happened to address Nigerians and not let us go into day 2, day 3, and who knows?
That's actually expected the president to have shown up like a day or two before, or even last week. Because the story about the protest has been on for like a month. So we knew, and you got a month notice to pull back, look at the policies, interrogate them, and there are of course policies that are so clear. For instance, on your day one in office, you remove fuel subsidy without any interrogation, without any policy framework, and suddenly you went further to do some kind of dollar floating, and those two policies, you were expecting some form of Adam Smith proposition that the invisible hand of demand and supply will operate. But the invisible hand of demand and supply did actually operate, but it went against the notion. Ordinarily, you expect that with the removal of government intervention, at the end of the day, you're going to see influx of petroleum product coming in, and there will be high level of competition. And when there's competition, there will be the possibility of a drop. But we didn't see it. Rather, we kept saying, because there was a floating of the dollar, and businessmen need to procure dollar to eventually procure the petroleum product. So if you procure dollar at the rate of 800, 1,000, now we are going to about, on the alternate market, about 1,600. So you imagine that, and people argue that, oh, but see, sincerely, subsidy is back. People don't know.
That's a whole kettle of fish, a whole other conversation. But at this point, let's get a sense of the mood here in Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory, and we can speak with Arise correspondent Ferdinand Roha, who is on standby to bring us the latest. Ferdinand, good to see you. I mean, you have been following events from the wee hours of the morning, and as a matter of fact, I was concerned for you when the tear gas and all whatnot began to fly everywhere, and thankfully you still have a smile on your face, and we pray it continues that way. Now, help us understand what the mood is like right now.
Well, thank God we still have the smiles on day one, and we just hope they're easing to day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, not to talk about that 10 like the protesters that they just threatened. But you want to say the atmosphere is becoming quite peaceful after the chaos of that we saw quite early in the day. Well, Perhaps let's divide whatever happened, across three phases. Well, first things first, early in the day, it was quite peaceful, and at a point, we thought the protesters, had gone to sleep. But then they converged at the National Stadium, like the authorities told them, and at about 11 a.m., they said, they are tired of staying at the National Stadium. It's not a sporting activity, it's a protest. They wanted a road protest, and then they did embark on that road protest. Well, they got to the three arms zone, and that's exactly where the security officials said enough is enough. And we started seeing canisters of tear gas flying. Well, hundreds of them, you want to say, and that did push the protesters back, and some other groups came in, but all in all, well, as regards the Federal Capital Territory, well, things were quite handled. You want to say, well, it was pretty handled by the security operatives. Well, in other parts of the FCT, where there was also violence, well, in Nyanya, there was violence, well, also in or perhaps you want to use the word chaos. Well, permit me to replace the violence with chaos. Well, also along the Kuba Express Road, well, there was also chaos. And talking about protesters being confronted by security operatives who felt, well, they shouldn't move further into the city. But all in all, we've not been able to put the casualties together. We're hearing, maybe one or two in some places, but we will try to authentify it and see exactly if there were any casualties.
Yeah, Ferdinand, are you able to say this, particular situation was what triggered the security personnel shooting tear gas? Were they provoked in any way? What really led to things, going left?
Well, absolutely no, there was no provocation. Permit me to say that. And, we saw the protesters march from the National Stadium to the Three Arms Zone. And within that period, while they marched, well, we saw the members of the Gas Brigade, and we also saw policemen provided cover. And it was at the point that they got to the Three Arms Zone, well, that we were trying to make their way to the Eagle Square to begin to have some sort of a rally. And that was exactly what the security operatives didn't want. They didn't want the protesters to gather at that point. Now, let's not forget exactly, that was about the rallying point during the NSAS protest. And that's exactly what they wanted to avoid, rallying within that Three Arms Zone where you had the National Assembly, where you had, the villa not too far from it, and the Federal Secretariat also. And for whatever reasons, the security operatives felt they had to push them back. That was when the canisters started flying. And trust protesters, well, they weren't just willing to back down. And so we saw some of them, threw the canisters back at the security operatives. But I can tell you that we didn't see any live ammunition fired. At that point, it was just the canisters. We didn't see any live ammunition used by the security operatives. Well, that seems to be something different from what we've seen in some protests, previously, when security operatives were quick to use, live cartridges, but that didn't happen thus far from what we have been able to authenticate. But did the tear gas cause problems for some persons, part of the protesters? Yes, it did cause problems. We did see one or two people choke. I don't know exactly their situation. You never know some of these things, how much or how badly these things could actually affect you. But all in all, that's the situation. Things seems to have become calm here. In terms of business activities, well, I can confirm to you that business activities were paralyzed within the FCT. Well, for those who did come out to the market, what they did was, honor the instruction of the market executives, come out and defend your shop. That's exactly what they did. Come out and defend your shop. Ensure that the looters didn't have opportunity to come in. Right. Ensure that, well, whatever is happening, people didn't make use of the opportunity and then cause chaos. And as regards the federal workers, well, they all sat back home, and definitely they had reasons to do that. The local government, the area council had told their staff to stay back at home, while for the federal staff, they didn't have any reason to even come out at all. They all stayed back, and thankfully that did happen, because workers on the streets or workers at work or in their places of work, and then with the kind of chaos that we saw today, anything could happen.
And hopefully with day one and the points made, we hope things don't, degenerate and go further. Ferdinand Roha, thank you as always. Thank you very much. Austin, counting the costs of this day one of this protest, I wonder if we can begin to, figure it out, but we'll leave it for the experts. Let's talk very quickly about the conduct of the security personnel, based on what we've heard from Ferdinand and reporters who've been on the field, and your assessment personally.
So in all, I'll give the police, of course, with the coordination that happened today, you will know that there was some level of caution. Do not engage, but be very careful when they cross the line. You could engage, because the security architecture will have to protect themselves. But what happened is that, Eagle Square was barricaded. It was a no-go area, because the FCT minister had secured some kind of order for protesters to be stationed at the stadium. But getting to the stadium, they wanted to move their way to Eagle Square. I would want to caution FCT minister, if you keep them, you can isolate them at the Eagle Square and have that place really tighten up.
Isolate who now? The security personnel or the
security personnel?
Protesters. Okay.
Release the Eagle Square, because that's where they want to use. And I'm not saying because there's a caution, there's some kind of power dynamics that no, I will not agree to protesters. I will follow the law. But the law says that they should station at the stadium. But if they want to use there, guard the process properly. Have this engagement. I saw police officers actually addressing protesters. In one of the videos in Edo, the commissioner of police in Edo was actually shouting, "Greater youth," and you saw that fellow, and that just connected. And there's a way you deal with these things. It's a rule of engagement. The police are actually they've upgraded. But just going forward, I think going back to the initial question you asked about Mr. President, I think Mr. President needs to quickly, as soon as possible, resolve certain issues. Number one, there's a disconnect within our economic policy, particularly monetary policy. The CBN is lacking some kind of capacity because of what has happened with the CBN, with the mass retrenchment. There's a decline in institutional memory. There's a decline in the capacity to actually turn out certain policy or advise on some trajectory. That is a challenge. And now if you snowball that to the fuel subsidy regime, rather than remove fuel subsidy as it were, you can actually deal with the inefficiency in the system. We know that the fuel subsidy regime had a lot of illicit financial flows. You can deal with that, block all of the loopholes, and then, very importantly, deal with those who are fraudulently.
As I reflect on this event of yesterday, my frustration and anger mirror that of the brave Nigerian youth who took to the street to protest, driven by desperation and a profound sense of injustice. These young Nigerians have had enough of the relentless oppression and systemic corruption that plague our nation. For years, we have endured the consequences of bad governance, economic and mismanagement, and blatant corruption. Politicians have perfected the act of deception, spinning tales of prosperity and reform while lining their pocket and leaving the rest of us to suffer. These young protesters are not mere statistics. They are individuals whose futures have been compromised by a regime that feigns concern while exploiting the very citizen it sought to protect. They are the voice of a generation that has been pushed to the brink, demanding to be heard. The protest was meant to be a peaceful call for change, a way to make their grievance known, but instead of being met with understanding, the protesters were met with violence. The police, rather than protecting the people, acted as enforcers of a corrupt regime, using tear gas and brute force to silence the voices calling for injustice. This was not law enforcement, it was a show of power meant to intimidate and suppress any opposition to the status quo. Witnessing the police assault on these courageous Nigerians was a stark reminder of the length to which the government will go to maintain control. The authorities, it seems, are more interested in preserving their power than addressing the legitimate concerns of their citizens. Protesters were chased away from their own designated spaces, treated like criminals for daring to challenge a corrupted system. This abuse of power is a violence of their right and only serve to deepen the anger and distrust felt by so many. The raw emotions of the protesters were palpable. Their chant and cries echoed through the street, directed not just at the police but a government that has consistently failed them. This was not merely a protest against economic hardship but a rejection of the broken promises, lies and deceit that has characterized Nigerian politics for far too long. Some even voiced their regret at being trapped in a country where leadership is synonymous with corruption and self-interest. This didn't show politicians who dismissed the protesters as fools, only highlighted the disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. Such callousness is the hallmark of the arrogance and entitlement that pervade our political landscape. These remarks are not just insulting, they are a blatant admission that the struggles of everyday Nigeria means nothing to those in power. Faced with such blatant disregard, the protesters reached their breaking point. They no longer steadily taking to, they could no longer sit idly by and watch as their country was run into the ground by corrupt officials and power-hungry leaders. In several states, their anger boiled over into violent confrontations as they stood their ground against a system that had pushed them to the brink. While some protesters were unfortunately inflated by opportunities and hoodlums seeking to capitalize on the chaos, this action should not overshadow the movement's true intent, a desperate cry for justice and end to the rampant corruption that has crippled our nation. The infectors are not representative of the movement, but are a symptom of the broader lawlessness and lack of accountability that have become hallmark of our political system. As I watched this event unfold, I felt a depth sense of empathy and solidarity with the protesters. Their anger is not only justified, it is a necessary force for change. They are fighting for a future free the shackles of corruption and oppression, a future where they can live with dignity and hope. This is not just a protest, it is an uprising against a regime that has failed its people time and again. In this moment of turmoil, they are sending a clear message that they will not be silent or intimidated by a government that has long ignored their plight. They are ready to fight for the change they are so desperate need, and their resilience in the space of adversity is nothing short of inspiring. The Nigerian youth are rising and their voice will no longer be ignored. The time for change is now, and they are ready to demand it with all the force that they can muster. This is all I have for you today. Stay tuned for our next video. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Please don't forget to like, comment and share, and stay tuned for our next video.